Heir to an extinguished fortune, Florentine nobility fallen on hard times, or perhaps a remittance man sent far from the family realm, the product of the third guard from the left. If so, the remittance would have been fairly meagre. Girolamo Pieri Nerli arrived in Australia with his friend and fellow painter Ugo Cotani, both in their early 20s and without much cash. They docked at Melbourne in 1885 with a swag of paintings from the days at the Accademia del Bell'Arte in Florence, and artefacts they picked up in Mauritius and other stopovers along the way with the intention of selling them on arrival. Sharing digs with Walt Withers and Arthur Lorerio, Cotani and Nerli from Florence and Siena respectively introduced the practices of the Macchioli school of painting to a small band of Melbourne artists including Tom Roberts and Arthur Streeton. The Macchies, meaning patches or spots as they were known, brought the idea of doing quick painting sketches of nature on unprimed wooden panels and cigar box lids. Moving into 5 Collins Street, Melbourne the following year, the gregarious Nerli, both exotic and quixotic, and with a penchant for spinning anecdotes, gained some notoriety as something of an avant-garde experimenter. Despite his rigorous academic training, he also brought a spontaneous flowing style of painting known as the School of Swish, and as a disciple of Giovanni Bodini and Silvestro Lega, and no doubt his royal connections, created a minor stir in the still very conservative and nominally class-envying culture of late 19th century Australia. Visiting the Pinchcoffs of Studley Park Hall, a Madame Elmhurst Good from Melbourne society referred to Nerli as, quote, an ex-king travelling incognito. Travelling back to Australia from a trip abroad on the same ship as Cotani and Nerli, she revealed their ability to imitate animal voices which, quote, so delighted the children. In 1886, Nerli moved to Sydney, the first of many moves between Melbourne, Sydney, Dunedin and Apia. He continued painting and selling works, including to the Art Society of New South Wales, and continued to influence the Australian scene, particularly Charles Condor, where, as historian Bernard Smith suggests, quote, Condor's departure of the SS Orient owes as much to Nerli as Roberts. Condor's painting Bronte Beach, Queen's Birthday, owes much to the flattened picture plane of the Macchies technique as borrowed from the Nerli handbook. In 1889 he travelled to New Zealand for the South Seas exhibition and so missed the 9x5 exhibition he so transparently influenced. After time spent in Tasmania, Western Australia and again back in Sydney, Nerli found himself in Samoa, where he bumped into Robert Louis Stevenson on the wharf in Apia. And after some misgivings about his character, Stevenson agreed to pose for the artist, purportedly some 27 times as it turned out. Nerli was credited with completing at least 2 works of the great writer, one in oils and another charcoal drawing, which is in the State Library of New South Wales collection. During the sittings at the writer's home, Vallama, the consumptive Stevenson, a compulsive writer, first penned a piece of doggerel dedicated to Nerli, enlisting Scottish expressions and colloquialisms as he conjured with the artist's mysterious background and connections. Did ever mortal man hear tell of sae singular a folly as the coming to Apia here of the painter Mr. Nerli? Recent evidence has emerged that suggests Stevenson, during the prolonged portrait sessions, wrote a good deal more than the poem dedicated to Nerli. In a correspondence with Leslie Curnow, the son of the then editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, found in the State Library of New South Wales collection, Stevenson alludes to a short story he wrote called The Remittance Man and is purportedly based on Nerli's life. When Stevenson wrote his book The Wrecker the same year, 1892, one chapter was titled The Remittance Man and supposedly refers to the real-life figure called Jack Buckland, a trader around the Pacific and known to Stevenson. Nerli's nickname was Jack, and it seems reasonable that the Jack Stevenson refers to in that chapter was in fact Nerli, who fitted the remittance man profile more than the hapless Buckland. In Stevenson's character of the remittance man in The Wrecker, he describes Norris Carthew needing to continually return to Sydney to pick up his remittance from a lawyer in order to prove his familial distance from his English home. Nerley was always returning to Sydney, presumably to pick up his quarterly payments from Italy. In a letter to Percy Spence, written in 1894 from Melbourne, Nerley entreats him to visit pictures by Alma Tadema and Millet, as well as giving the thumbs up to the Melbourne girls. "Damn bloody fine," he wrote. As a postscript, Nerley adds, quote, "Stevenson's story about me is still with Leslie. R says never to show it, but I will some day," unquote. In the year the portraits were painted, 1892, Stevenson wrote to Leslie Curnow to say he was ill and unable to attend a lecture he'd planned for him. He adds, "When you see Nerley, be sure to remind him to send the Remittance Man manuscript back to me for editing," unquote. Nerley must have shown the story to Curnow, whose delayed response to Stevenson's letter includes the words, quote, "I was greatly taken by the short story you wrote for Nerley. The Remittance Man is worthy of being published," unquote. The story of the Remittance Man, if it exists, was never returned to Stevenson, who died a few years later in 1894. New versions of the Stevenson portrait turned up, and Nerley may have added to the originals and sold them in order to survive. The manuscript, acknowledged by at least 3 people including Stevenson, has never been found. Did he and Curnow plan to release it after Stevenson's death, and somehow it was lost before they could? Or did Nerley, acting on Stevenson's advice never to show it, destroy it? Or intriguingly, was it stored somewhere and forgotten? Nerley's legacy in Australian art is enduring. The mystery of the missing story may well be too.